When Sony revealed the PlayStation 5 back in June of 2020, they also revealed some pretty spectacular trailers. But perhaps the most surprising reveal was for a completely new IP developed by an indie studio with no track record. That's right, Kena Bridge of Spirits is Ember Lab's first ever video game, but thanks to its spectacular visuals and irresistible charm, it's now one of the most anticipated games of 2021. But with only 2 trailers released so far, what do we actually know about the gameplay? Actually, quite a bit. Thanks to a slew of interviews, videos, reports, and a Game Informer cover story, we've learned a lot about the combat, the characters, Kena's abilities, and the world she explores. And I've crammed it all into this video where I cover 10 intriguing details about Kena, Bridge of Spirits. Bridge of Spirits will no doubt involve a lot of exploration, but it's not an open-world game. According to Ember Lab, quote, "You'll encounter a village fairly early on in the game, and that serves as a hub. From there, you can travel to several connected regions. Think of it as being wide linear. There are secrets to find and things to discover off the main path, but it's not an open-world game." End quote. So what does he mean by wide linear? My guess is that levels will be mostly linear in their overarching structure, but as I'll highlight in the next segment, some smaller objectives within levels, such as collecting key items, can be completed in any order. Plus, one of Kena's main objectives in Bridge of Spirits is to clear the world of corruption, and doing so in the village will require you to restore what are called dead zones. To do this, you'll have to find specific items in the game's world that hold special meaning to former residents. Bring these items back to the dead zone they're linked to, and those areas of the village will be cleared of corruption. Even if you have to clear dead zones in a specific order, but particularly if you don't, the quest structure sounds very reminiscent of an open-world game. Plus, my hope is that clearing dead zones will be how you'll open up new areas of the village and, in turn, new levels. And speaking of levels, what will you be doing in them? Well, apparently, quite a lot. In Bridge of Spirits, Kena's role is that of a spirit guide. Basically, many of the people you meet in this world are actually spirits, and your job is to help troubled spirits so they can move on to the next life. As put by Ember Lab co-founder Mike Greer, quote, "The main focus of the game actually revolves around helping these trapped spirits. So each kind of level or world that you enter is all focused and kind of themed around the corrupted spirit that's lingering." End quote. In a demo shown to Game Informer, Kena was tasked with helping a corrupted spirit named Taro. To do this, Kena first had to visit a shrine to acquire a mask. Wearing this mask enabled Kena to access an area that was previously off-limits. Next, she had to find 3 items that were of significance to Taro: a lantern, a knife, and a container of food. These could be collected in any order, but to find them, Kena had to fend off some enemies, including a mini-boss, and she had to execute several of what Game Informer called climbing challenges. Finally, to clear Taro of the corruption that had taken over his spirit, Kena faced off against a proper boss. I'll get to who this boss is in a bit, but for now, I also want to point out this tweet where Ember Lab teased a, quote, "icy landscape," which we can see in the distance. Ultimately, it sounds like the stages will provide plenty of variety in terms of environments, but also gameplay, from combat to exploration to platforming and puzzle solving. If you're even remotely interested in Kena, surely you're aware of the Rot. These are adorable little furballs that you'll find and recruit one by one. According to Game Informer, the first Rot you recruit will act as the leader of the bunch, and he'll sit perched on Kena's shoulder, dishing out hints to guide you in the right direction. The rest of the crew will provide Kena with a number of handy abilities. The first is called Rot Carry, which allows a group of Rot to lift and move heavy objects. Once placed, these objects will allow Kena to climb up to areas that were too high for her to reach using her double jump alone. Similarly, the developers have described how the rot might join together to, for example, link up a broken bridge that Kena was previously unable to cross. Next is an ability called Rot Courage, which allows the rot to strengthen Kena's attacks in combat. Now, when Kena first encounters an enemy, the rot are afraid and might scurry away. But the more Kena succeeds in a specific encounter, presumably by landing successful attacks, the rot will save up courage, which is indicated by a circular gauge in the UI. Once the gauge is full, you can summon the rot to join the fray and strengthen your attacks. Furthermore, the rot can apparently be used to distract enemies, and this might be done through the other rot ability called Rot Cloud. Basically, Kena can summon her furry friends to become a swarm that you can control using the right analog stick. The cloud can then be used to clear corruption and perform certain attacks, but you can only keep the rot in this cloud form for a limited time. And this might go without saying, but all the rot's abilities get more powerful the more of them you collect, and if you were wondering, these little furballs can't die, not even in combat. Once recruited, they're with Kena for the duration. Lastly, we know there are exactly 100 rot to find and recruit. If you want to find them all, it's likely you'll have to venture off the beaten path and explore the world more thoroughly. So we looked at the rot's abilities, but what about Kena herself? Well, it sounds like one of her most useful abilities will be this pulse, and apparently it helps with both combat and exploration. As put by Josh Greer, co-founder of Ember Lab, quote, "It allows you to get the environment to react to give you clues, but it's also connected to Kena's shields as well," end quote. Highlighting clues makes it sound a bit like the pulse abilities we've seen in a lot of other games, but from the footage I've shown, it's clear that it'll also deal damage to enemies, and the developers have explained that it can even help clear growths of corruption called corrupted hearts. And it will allow Kena to transfer energy into buildings and perhaps other objects as well. For example, at one point in the demo shown to Game Informer, Kena apparently used her pulse to charge a pair of shrines, which then opened some sort of passageway. Next, let's look at how this pulse activates Kena's shield. To do so, you'll have to hold down the button that activates the pulse, and that will create this force field that actually absorbs damage. But it has its limits. In fact, it has its own health gauge, and once depleted, Kena will once again become vulnerable to basic attacks. Finally, if you activate this pulse right when an enemy attack would make contact, you'll apparently stagger your opponent, adding an additional layer of depth to the combat. And speaking of combat, Kena's base weapon in Bridge of Spirits is her staff, which can dish out light, heavy, and charged attacks, as well as a few basic combos. But her combat skills aren't limited to melee attacks. At some point, Kena will obtain an upgrade that allows her staff to double as a bow. With the bow, you can target enemy weak points, which, as I mentioned earlier, you can expose by sending in the rot to distract your opponents. Plus, there's a slow motion aiming mode that allows for even more accuracy. Now, if you plan on using your bow to constantly keep your distance, be warned that the game is designed to prevent camping from afar. According to the developers, enemy AIs are coded to rush at you if you hold your bow and aim for too long. Plus, you can't just rapid fire arrow after arrow after arrow after arrow. In fact, your quiver can only hold 4 arrows, and each of them has a cooldown. Fire all 4 in rapid succession, and you'll have to wait for their cooldowns to expire before your quiver will refill, so make sure you're efficient with your shots. Finally, using the Rot Courage ability, the rot can be used to strengthen the energy of each arrow to the point where Kena can penetrate multiple enemies using a single shot. And here it looks like the rot can spread damage to nearby enemies when an arrow lands a hit. Just like the pulse ability, it sounds like your bow will be a very versatile tool. When it comes to bosses in Bridge of Spirits, one thing you might not notice just by watching the trailers is they might actually be, in a way, the good guys. In an article published in PlayStation Official Magazine, Josh Greer said, quote, "Each boss is the corrupted spirit of a particular individual in the story who must let go of this world and move on. Ultimately, Kena struggles with bosses to help them find peace." End quote. In the case of Taro, a troubled spirit who I mentioned earlier, he's not an evil spirit per se, but he has been corrupted to the point where he's been overtaken by a vicious form called the Wood Knight. As I understand things, in order to defeat the Wood Knight and hence free Taro, you'll apparently have to use your combat skills to destroy the structure of corruption that surrounds him. One way to apparently do this is to summon your rot to burst corrupted growths on his body. So how tough will these bosses be? While there may be some visual similarities, Ember Lab have said that they won't be nearly as tough as the bosses in, say, Sekiro, Bloodborne, or Dark Souls, but if you do want a challenge, you can adjust the difficulty. Now, this might come as a disappointment to some, but if you're hoping for Kena to provide a 30 to 40 hour experience, yeah, that's not gonna happen. The devs have said on numerous occasions that this is a game you'll be able to beat in a weekend, at least if you stick to the main quest line. But in creating a shorter experience, Ember Lab was able to focus on quality rather than just packing it full of less meaningful content. As put by Josh Greer, quote, "We really want a rich experience, but we were finding ourselves daunted by these 100-hour or even 40-hour experiences. When we set out to make this game, we were targeting ourselves a bit. We wanted to have that feeling of an immersive, awesome world experience, but on a smaller scale." End quote. Another benefit to the shorter length is that it's reflected in the game's price. It's listed at $39.99, and if you want to get even more game for your money, players will be able to do so if they want to find all the rot and collectibles. And speaking of, so we already talked about how you'll be able to collect all 100 rot throughout Bridge of Spirits, and they're cute enough. But you'll also be able to collect hats for them to wear. These are purely cosmetic, and from the sound of it, you can collect them in two ways. First, Game Informer described a cart back in your village where a vendor sells hats. If you see one you like, you'll have to first collect enough of the game's currency to buy it. And buying every hat will apparently be no easy feat. As put by Mike Greer, quote, "If you wanted to buy a hat for every guy, it would be pretty hard to do. You'd have to go out of your way to find all the currency in the game." End quote. Then it sounds like the second way you'll be able to collect hats is to just find them out in the world. As a post on the PlayStation blog said that, quote, "Dozens of hats are hidden throughout the game." And lastly, no, you won't be able to buy anything like hats or collectibles with real money. Ember Lab has confirmed that Kena will have no microtransactions. If you're thinking that Kena Bridge of Spirits harkens back to old-school 3D Zelda games, that's no coincidence. The devs at Ember Lab are apparently huge Zelda fans, and to help pitch the idea of Kena to different publishers, they actually created a Zelda fan film called Majora's Mask: Terrible Fate, which I'm showing now. So how will the influence of Majora's Mask be felt in Bridge of Spirits? Well, you may have caught earlier in the video that one of Kena's quests involves wearing a mask that enables her to explore new areas. Yeah, that's not the only mask Kena will wear throughout her journey. According to Josh Greer, the game features a character called the Mask Maker. Whenever someone dies in this world, the Mask Maker crafts a mask in their likeness. When that mask decays, their associated spirit can move on to the next life. But when a spirit is troubled, their mask stops decaying, preventing them from moving on. These are the masks Kena will wear to use and to, at the very least, access new areas. Here's how Greer described it. Quote, "Because the spirits are stuck, the masks are not decaying and they're staying there. You use the spirit's mask to connect with them, take down some of the walls and barriers that they've set up that are blocking your path, and then eventually help them move on." End quote. Whether masks will do more than open up the world, we don't know, but nonetheless, Zelda's influence is clear, and it'll be interesting to see what other similarities we might see in the final game. This is a quick one, but if you're planning on playing Bridge of Spirits on PlayStation and you don't yet own a PS5, know that you will be able to upgrade to the PS5 version for free when you eventually get Sony's new console. But what sort of upgrade are we talking about? What makes the PS5 version special? Well, there is the integration of the adaptive triggers and haptic feedback in the DualSense controller. But the developers have also said that there will be certain visual upgrades. For example, the PS5 will be able to display all 100 RAW on screen at once, while the PS4 will not. Foliage will also appear much more dense on the PS5. At the end of the day, both the PS4 and PS5 versions should look great, but it's nice to know that upgrading to the PS5 version will be free. So there you have it. That's everything I've learned about Kena Bridge of Spirits. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends. And if you want more Quest Mode content, don't forget to subscribe and check out my preview-focused video game podcast called Preloaded. I've left the link in the description. Lastly, if you want to keep up with me and see what I'm playing, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Quest Mode Games. Until next time, I want to remind everyone to never stop questing.